welcome back, it's Spadester. So, Diary of Wimpy Kid Big Shot is finally here, and in today's video, I'll be doing a review on it. And yes, this is also going to be a spoiler review, so there's your warning right there. Leave the video now if you don't want to be spoiled, but anyways, let's begin. So after reading Diary of Wimpy Kid Big Shot, the 15th entry in the series at this point, this book was decent, all things considered. It's a book that focuses a lot on this one premise, obviously, and expands on it in its own unique way. But the problem is when a series is going on for this long, you would eventually have to look back around and bump over stuff that has been previously been established and touched upon, while at the same time retreading pretending those things have ever even happened. And that's the sort of feeling I get when it comes to reading this book. But anyways, let's talk about the actual story itself first, because there is a lot of stuff to unpack here that I want to go over about this book because of some stuff that happens in it that I did not like. The book opens with Greg saying he's never the most athletic person or someone who is good at sports or even like it. He goes on to tell a story of a time when he used to actually enjoy playing sports, more specifically soccer, because of the lack of any proper rules being enforced within each game until he enters kindergarten, where they eventually started caring about implementing these rules. Obviously, credit where credit is due, the humor and jokes for this one were actually pretty good. And Jeff Kinney must have had a blast doing research on sports just for this book, as he talks about in an interview prior to him making this book, with him talking about wanting to write a book solely dedicated to sports. There's one joke at the beginning of the book that I really like, when it was told to us that the soccer field became completely unkept because the snack bar is not making enough profit to have someone mow down the grass regularly, because the mom started replacing them with more healthier food. But with that said, some of the jokes in this book were clearly recycled from previous books, which is not a good sign. So to bring up one example, in this book it talks about how most cartoon characters that you see in commercials and ads are completely made up by companies and are not actually real people, obviously. In which, if you're paying attention, is a joke that was reused all the way back from the 5th book, The Ugly Truth, when Rowley's parents decided to hire Cool Brian as a replacement friend for him when he had a falling out with Greg. But Greg later discovers that Cool Brian is actually part of a mentorship company that Greg suspects has multiple employees, with one of the Brians with Rowley looking completely different than his usual guy that he hangs around with. And this is something later we use first in the book Double Down, with the character of I Am Spooky, who was told to us by Susan that was most likely not a real person, and could have been just multiple ghostwriters making stories under the name of I Am Spooky. It is now being reused in Diary of Wimpy Kid Big Shot once again. But the issue that I mainly have a big problem with is with Greg seemingly suffering from some sort of amnesia, and is noticeably much more dumber when he reacted to this. Like, Greg, you already know that companies do this all the time like 10 books ago. How is this a big shock to you? But anyways, there are two big events in this book that happened that is worth noting. The first one is with Greg's school having a field day where the kids participate in physical activities. And obviously, most of the kids wasn't excited about this idea. But the catch in this year's field day is that the winning homeroom would get a day off on Friday. And that got everyone motivated to partake in this year's field day. And it wasn't just the kids at Greg's school who were excited about this because of the prize, because even the lunch waiters and janitors also wanted to participate in this event. They demanded this request to the vice principal, to which is just very strange to me, because here's the thing, I don't go to a lot of American schools, so why would there be like 5 janitors present in the school grounds during daytime? I mean, it's not like they're working like overnight with like 5 janitors, because presumably they're working in like night shifts as well with different janitors present there. So why would they still need a day off if this was going to be the case as well? And so a lot of homeroom teachers started to trade students that were much more physically stronger to help their chances of winning, in which you can consider this to some extent as a form of human trafficking. Another issue that I have with Diary of Wimpy Kid Big Shot was that the adults in this one were acting so obnoxious and desperate to win, to the point that they would cheat, and where you can even say to the point that some of the stuff that they did can be considered as wacky. So a good example of what I'm talking about is at one point in the book, they had to play a game of sack race, but turns out the sacks that were used still has potatoes left in them, to which Greg suspects that the lunch waiters purposely left them in there in order for them to get a cheap win. In the earlier books, the adults never really acted this way as far as I can remember, because we see things in Greg's perspective, right? So we usually get some moments where we see Greg come up with these wild conspiracies about the adults doing something sketchy or underhanded. But in reality, they are actually pretty reasonable people. Obviously, I'm not saying that there aren't people like this in the real world, but from the internal logic of how Diary of Wimpy Kid seems to operate, where consequences is query and is constantly present. It was weird to see the adult characters not just in this book but in all of the recent books act this way. But anyways, the TLDR of the storyline, the field day ends with the one tradies winning, which left the janitors to take their place in the cafeteria for the rest of the day. The second storyline and big event of this book comes after the field day, with Greg pretty much giving up on sports, but Susan encouraged him to give sports another try by signing up for basketball. And it's in this part of the book we also see previous characters from the books making a return to be a part of Greg's team, like Edward Mealy, who first appeared in the book Roderick Rules, Darren and Marcus Woodley, who appeared in The Last Straw, and finally Ruby Bird, who first appeared in the book The Third Wheel. Aside from the returning characters, we also get some new characters that were introduced for this book that played a major part as well. And one of the new characters is named Preet Patel, who is the only one in Greg's team who is actually good at playing basketball. And then there's his dad, who is the team's coach, Mr. Patel, who is the main villain of this book because he's standing right next to Greg in the title page. And if you read the book, he doesn't come off as a very antagonistic character overall. Part of the reasons for that is because he doesn't have much dialogue in this book except for some few pages when he does something. Like say for example, Greg's team is messing around and not practicing, he's pretty much getting them back on track to do that task. And that's not very antagonistic for me, especially for this book. And so Greg's team went on to play against other teams from other schools in a tournament. And so as you'd expect, Greg's team was not very good at, despite them having Preet on their side carrying them. And so to make a long story short about this storyline, they lost the tournament because Preet was injured in one of their games, and so he wasn't able to play for the rest of the season. After this, Greg has pretty much given up on playing any sort of sports after the whole experience. But Susan was not done and decided to convince Greg and Steve to again play in a basketball tournament called the Second Chance Tournament, which is a tournament literally held in a prison, and the deal was your team cannot win until you're able to win a single game. And you would expect them to finally win a single game, to which they performed just as poorly as they did in the previous tournament. But that was until their final match, where a miracle happened. In the final match, Greg managed to get a hold of the ball and throw it backwards, which early in the book is a technique that he discovered during their practice, but never got a chance to use it as it was deemed as an unorthodox method of throwing the ball. But instead of shooting the ball to the enemy team's basket, however, he threw it on his own team's basket, to which Greg celebrated this win with the enemy team, while Susan and his teammates decided to book it and decided to just left him behind in the final page, with them just driving away. And this ending just left a very bad taste in my mouth when I first read it. And this ending, in my opinion, is not good, because prior to the tournament happening, it was shown to us that Susan was the person who spent all of her money to make this all possible. And this makes Greg's decision in the end, for me, feels very unsympathetic to the amount of effort that Susan has to make this all happen, which, mind you, is completely in character for Greg to do this out of spite to Susan, who insisted on Greg to keep participating in these types of activities like basketball that he clearly has no interest in, or at least good at, which is something we saw quite a bit in previous books as well. This ending was also very unrealistic. Like I mentioned earlier when I talked about the adults, the ending for it seems to remind me a lot of what happened in the ninth book, Diary of Wimpy Kid Book, where we saw the Hepleys had a lot of difficulty just trying to get back home, in addition to thinking that their wallets and phones were stolen by the weirdos. And Greg getting left behind at the end of the book feels like a cop-out ending that defies all logic to what we know how the world of Diary of Wimpy Kid operates, and was just there to stay consistent with the whole bait and switch ending that the book has always had. And with that said, is this book even worth buying? I would say you should just skip out on this entry of the book series and save a few bucks while you're at it. But if you're someone who enjoys collecting the Wimpy Kid books for the sheer novelty of owning a physical copy, I'm not discouraging you from doing so and buying and even reading this book. But with that said, that's pretty much all I have to say about this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or find it informative, leave a like. If you want to see more videos like this, consider subscribing. And with that said, this is Spadester, signing out.